Kendal came to me and she's like, we have to talk to JW about this. And I said, we don't have to talk to JW about this. And she said, no, we need to talk to him about it. And I said, here's the thing.
And I thought the dinner table would be a perfect conversation for all to hear.
Yeah, this is why God gives you two parents, so that moments like that can be avoided. Hello and welcome to the Matt and Kendal Hagee podcast. Kendal and I recently decided that it was a good idea for us to sit down and share with you, our viewers and listeners, content that is faith-filled and biblically based. That's the purpose of this program, to give you, our listeners, the opportunity to ask the questions that are important to you and find out not only what does the Bible have to say about it, but how do you apply that in your daily life? You know, it's one thing to have a church environment where you can be encouraged to live in the Word, but then how do you do that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday,
Saturday, Sunday?
And so if you value this kind of content, we welcome you to this podcast. And if you'd like to, we'd want for you to share it with anybody and everybody you know who needs this type of answer to real life questions. I've got a beautiful co-host, and I'm so glad that you joined us. And, you know, Kendal and I want to welcome you into this conversation and encourage you to reach out and let us know some of the things that are on your heart and mind that we might be able to help you with as we have opportunity to share more content through this platform.
So we want you to subscribe, like he said. So share this, because I know I've got some girlfriends out there that want to hear some of these topics behind the scenes with Pastor Matt and Kendal. And I'm looking forward to this one because it's talking about kids, parenting, things that I know that I can put some information in as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter in Christ, that I know that I need help, because we all need to get some sound advice, wisdom.
Absolutely. I don't think anybody's got everything figured out, but if you have opportunity to draw from multiple wells of wisdom, then you get the opportunity to do the best job you can.
Yeah, so today we're talking about raising kids in a world that rejects truth.
Boy, that's a statement. You know, I think that it's important to understand that that's not an exaggeration.
No.
Our world rejects truth. It literally expels it, almost as if it's got an intolerance to it. If you were physically allergic to something and you came in contact with it, your body would repel it.
That's right.
And the culture that we live in many cases, repels truth. And a lot of parents, they're overwhelmed with the idea of how do we as Bible-believing Christians, how do we, instill the values of faith and family and the things that are important to us into our children, and can it be done?
That's right.
The good news is yes, it can be done, but you have to be very intentional about it. So we've got one of our listeners. We have a question
from a mom who said, "Hi, Pastor Matt and Kendal. I'm a mom of 2 elementary-age boys. Last week, my 8-year-old came home from school and asked me, is it okay for someone to have 2 moms? He said his friend at school told the class that that's what their family looks like. And when the teacher responded, she just said, families come in all shapes and sizes. That was it. I froze for a second. I wasn't expecting that conversation so soon. I've always known I need to talk about truth, but I thought I had more time. Honestly, I feel overwhelmed. How do we teach our kids to love people but still stand firm on what the Bible says? How do I protect their hearts without sheltering them from reality? The world is so loud right now, and I feel like it's teaching our kids faster than we can. How do we raise them to know and live God's truth in a world that keeps rejecting it?
Well, first and foremost, to the individual that sent that in, thank you so much for having the courage to share your experience. And if you're watching or listening and you want to address an issue, we encourage you to connect with us. You can send it in. We'll put the link in the show notes or give you opportunity to find out how you can submit those questions. Several things come to mind in listening to the statement here. The first is, there's no innocent era This is a mom who's got, she's saying 8-year-old?
8-year-old, yes, son.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of parents, especially, when you and I were growing up, but we're 80s babies. We're both 78 models. We're late 70s, vintage, but then we did all of our growing up in the Reagan years, thank God.
Yes.
And the idea then was that there would be age-appropriate issues that you would have to address at some point in time. We all remember what it was like when we had to bring the permission slip home to watch the film in fifth grade for girls, in sixth grade for boys.
Now, I always wonder about that.
Well, we might not have developed as fast. I don't know. But
I think so.
Regardless, if you went back and looked at that content that they showed us with the permission slip now, it's pretty benign. It's very sterile.
Outdated.
Not only is it outdated, but there wasn't anything that would even be considered controversial. In this particular question, you have a mother of elementary school children, which should be a warning to parents who might not be aware, because a lot of people just don't want to believe that their children are being introduced to these types of topics. But in the world that we live in, not only does it reject truth, but there is no age of innocence.
No.
There is no space where the culture says they're too young to hear that. I think, it was just recently that they were having a case where judges were ruling on what was age-appropriate material in kindergarten. And the content that they were discussing, you would have been shocked if you would have found it at a university level with adults having this discussion. Instead, it's being read to kindergartners. So the first thing that jumps out is to be aware as parents that your children are being introduced to things that you might not feel comfortable addressing, but you have to find the courage to do it.
That's right.
The second thing that I think jumps out is that when this issue was addressed in the classroom, that the authority, which is the teacher, everybody taller than you is a sir or a ma'am. That's how I was raised. And so the authority, which is the teacher, is not giving a statement of truth, but relativism.
Yes.
And that's the nature of truth. Truth is not relative. Truth is yes, and truth is no. Truth is right, and truth is wrong. There is no my truth, your truth. There is just the truth. And for people who read the Word of God, we understand what the Bible says, thy word is truth. True. So as parents, we have to first and foremost define truth for our kids and help them understand it's not relative. Families don't come in all shapes and sizes. The biblical definition of a family is a father and a mother created in the image of God, two separate genders, being fruitful and multiplying, having kids. And that can create a place where your child is going to have to defend a position that might not be seen as popular.
Yeah.
But at least they'll know the truth. When I was growing up as a kid, I would have, conversation with my dad, and the conversation was not an appointment that I made. It was, while we were driving to Little League practice, or it was at dinner, or it was, playing outside in the backyard. And it didn't matter what question I asked, I got the answer. He never sheltered us from the truth. It didn't matter if you asked a hard question or a simple question, he'd say, well, let me tell you about that. And then whenever he filled in those blanks, you at least understood, what was right and what was wrong. Now, because of his presence in my life, I had a confidence that I at least knew the truth. Now, I'm one of 5 kids. Some of us would take what we were told and go share it. I was somewhat of an evangelist. I would go tell people, this is what my dad said. And then, some of my siblings weren't as outspoken, but at least they understood where the anchor of truth was, and they weren't going to get caught up in the ideas of the day.
Yeah.
And so I believe that every parent has a responsibility to not succumb to relativism and look at their child and say, well, that's their perspective, or we want them to feel like, they can hold to what they believe. That's the kind of overwhelming intimidation that the culture is trying to create. You need to look at your child and say, that's not correct. This is what is true.
The word says.
Because that's what the child wants to know.
Yeah.
Tell me what's right and tell me what's wrong.
With this point, this may be a public school teacher versus a private school teacher.
You would hope.
I would hope, because I think as a public school teacher, that wasn't a bad response. But then I'd also say, go home and ask your parents. And then, because at public school, they have a fine line of what they can and cannot share, which kind of puts your kids in a box. So I think versus our private school teachers at Cornerstone Christian Schools, they could have gone more into the biblical aspect of that. So, I do have to give that teacher somewhat of a hey.
I think to be fair to certain teachers, they're walking a tightrope.
I was going to say, so our public school teachers that are watching, I understand you are in a tight box of what you can, and some of them that are Christians
You're
believe.
in a tight box, but the topic is, how do you as a parent
so as a parent,
teach the kid?
If the teacher would have said, go home and ask your parents. Now,
Correct.
The good thing about us at the Hagee house, we have no question is off limit. Being a nurse, I always tell my kids, ask me medical questions, ask Dad the biblical questions. And so we have this thing at our house where Matt says the man cave. So let's tell him about
it's called Manland.
Oh, Manland. Excuse me. I have the woman land. So he does the man land.
I don't go there.
So
it's females only.
This kind of goes a little different route, but it's still talking about the same truth. And so our kids wanted to talk to us more about.
Well, I think it's important that every parent establish for your child that when they want to know something, you are a safe place to ask.
Yes. And that's why I really want to find a safe place.
The importance of it is so that they don't hide things from you.
Yes, and they don't have to ask their teachers. They
Correct.
can come home and trust and ask you.
And a big part of that has to do with your ability to control your reaction.
Yes.
You as a parent might be shocked to hear your child ask a certain question, regardless of what it is, but you have to be able to control that so that they don't feel like they're in trouble for asking it.
No, you don't want any
because the second that they feel threatened,
they're going to go ask somebody else.
Well, they'll retreat.
Yeah.
And do you want the world shaping them?
No, you want.
Or do you want to be the one who gets a chance to shape them? So with regard to Manland. Yeah. This occurred at a point in time where Kendal got a phone call from another mother. And the mom was concerned that her son had started to ask some more mature questions about relationships between men and women. It was all sexual in nature. Mm-hmm. And she felt that she needed to give you a warning in the event that our son was going to bring up the same topic. And, that he might have heard it from her son, and they were on the same football team, and immediately Kendal came to me and she's like, we have to talk to JW about this. And I listened to what she had to say about who had called and why she had called, and I said, we don't have to talk to JW about this. And she said, no, we need to talk to him about it. And I said, here's the thing.
And I thought the dinner table would be a perfect conversation for all to hear.
Yeah, this is why God gives you two parents, so that moments like that can be avoided. But here's what happened. This particular child, he was the youngest of three, and he had three older brothers.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a younger brother. I have a brother who's 6 years older than me. I learned a lot ahead of schedule because I had a brother who was 6 years older than me. So I know what younger brothers get to hear. JW, all he had was an older sister, and she was into American Girl dolls. So there was no way that she was going to be the one to introduce him to certain topics. And I was pretty sure that, this child that the mom was calling about, he had heard what he heard from his older brothers, and all he was doing was repeating a conversation that was happening in their house. But that it hadn't happened at our house yet.
That's right.
However, in order for us as parents to have an understanding and for, creating this environment of a safe place, I told Kendal, I said, I'll take care of it. And at the time, for context, JW's currently an 18-year-old.
Yes.
This was 10 years ago.
Yes,
he was 8.
He was 8. So about the same. That's where my brain was going. 8-year-old asking questions is very common.
He's laying in bed. It's about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. He's already supposed to be asleep. And, I walk into the room and I said, "Hey, bud," I said, "How you doing?" And he says, "I'm good, Dad." It's unexpected time for me to visit. And I said, I want to invite you to a special place. And he's like, "Where's that?" Because at 8 years old, you want to go on any adventure you can with your dad. Yeah. And I said, "We're going to go to Manland." And he's like, "I want to go to Manland." And I was like, "Well, there's only men in Manland." And I said, and when we get to Manland, we have man-to-man conversations. And I said, "So if you go there," I said, "anything you ask me stays there." I said, "I'm not going to discuss it with your mom. I'm not going to discuss it on a podcast with all these people watching." I said, when we discuss these topics, I said, it's just you and you can say anything you want. I said, you're not going to get in trouble. Whatever you want to ask, I said, that's perfectly permissible in Manland. I said, now, when we leave Manland, I said, it's a private conversation between you and we can't bring it up outside of the environment because certain things are not appropriate for public conversation. No. You don't want your kid walking out and going, "You know what my dad told me about how this happens or this works." So I told JW, I said, "Now here's when you know that we're in Manland." I said, "I'm going to walk in your room. I'm going to take off my boots and I'm going to lay down on your bed." And I said, "As long as we're laying on your bed and my boots are off," I said, "we're in Manland. You can ask me anything." And so, it just so happened in that particular occasion, I said, "Are you ready to go to Manland?" He's like, "Yeah." So I lay down and we're laying there and it's quiet for about 2 minutes and I can kind of
it's a long 2
feel
minutes
him.
Until a female was not in there.
I can feel him gathering his thoughts. And I'm thinking to myself, "Oh Lord, please don't let him ask anything that I'm not ready to answer." And he goes, "Dad," he goes, there's something that I really, really wanted to know." And I was like, "Okay." And he said, on WWE, when Stone Cold Steve Austin pours beer on somebody after he slams them, he goes, "Is that legal? Because I heard it was illegal to waste or consume beer on public television. I just don't understand how he can do that." First and foremost, I was relieved that we were talking about Stone Cold Steve Austin and not mature sexual matters that he may or may not have been introduced to. And then, once we immediately answered that very age-appropriate and silly question, I walked out of the room. That's the other half of the story.
Yes.
Is Mom.
I was waiting right there outside the room with my ear.
You might as well had a glass up against the door.
I was hiding in the bathroom because it kind of goes connected to his room, so waiting to hear his response, thinking he's going to bring up the topic. She asked me, she said, "Did you talk to him about what we discussed?" And I said, "He has no idea about it." And "Are you sure?"
"Yeah, well, you asked me if I was sure." And I said, "I'm more than sure." I gave him all the runway he needed to ask. And I said, "He has no clue. He's not worried about it in the slightest." However, I said, he did ask about Stone Cold Steve Austin, at which point, you with your medical background in nursing felt that it was the appropriate time to go in and have the full birds and bees conversation with our 8-year-old son. And for the next 20 minutes, you enlightened him not only on how babies are made, but what appropriate relationships are and what they're not. And while that was certainly a lot of information for him to ingest in that moment, when you got done with that conversation, I warned you, and you had to learn the hard way.
I did.
I said, "Yeah." I said, "Now he knows." And I said, and in about 15 minutes, I said, his younger brother is going to know. I said, because whenever you learn something, you got to share it. And so the next morning at breakfast, we're sitting there and Joel, who is about 6, is looking across the table at you, and I can tell by his expression that he has a lot of questions that he wants to ask. And Hannah, who's about 11, is sitting over there next to JW, and Joel goes, "So, Mom, when are you going to talk to me about my sex organs?" At which point, Hannah drops her fork and says, "Wait, what?"
What?
And JW just puts his head in his hands like, "Oh, man, you've ratted us out." And I just looked over at you like, well, then there's that.
Conversation.
Which proves the point.
I know.
It proves the point with all this storytelling.
Yeah.
Nobody does it perfect.
That's right. You're not the perfect parent.
Nobody has all the answers. However, when you encounter these moments, don't run away from them.
No, don't.
Tell your kids the truth. Tell them what the Bible says, because if nothing else, they will at least understand that the Bible is the source of truth in all circumstances.
Yes.
Give them the opportunity to hear your confidence in that truth, and let them know that whatever questions they have, they're going to be able to ask you, and that you will give them as good an answer as you can. You might not always give them the best answer, and you might not always have the best method for delivering the information, but you will give them the opportunity to express what they're feeling, what they need to know, and even if the two of you have to go on an adventure to discover the answer together, they recognize you're not going to abandon them. That's because as I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, there's no age appropriateness in our current culture. Well, from the earliest of ages, your children need to learn to trust you. And if they start that early on, they'll do it consistently throughout the rest of their life.
That's so good. Yes. So Manland, Womanland, find a place to be with your kids where they can have just kind of take off your boots, take off your sandals, and find a place. Or you can also do it at the dinner table.
They got to have a safe
place. And we try to be intentional on making sure our kids have conversation around the dinner table.
We've got a 20-year-old.
I know. Now our kids are older, so we're going through
And our youngest is 12, and she's probably more emotionally prepared than the rest of them, just because she's the youngest of the four, and she's gotten to hear it all the way through. As they grow, as they mature, you'll have the opportunity to bring more conversation to an open environment inside the home. But they need to know early on, and in the case of our listener here, it's an 8-year-old that they have, a parent that God has given them to direct them and guide them and deliver truth.
Yes, and some stats that we're looking at here in research. Barna says 1/3 of Christian parents say they're media stressed, overwhelmed by what their kids are seeing online. And I do have to say, versus where Hannah's 20 and Madison is 12, Madison has been exposed to more things at a very young age, at age 12, versus to what Hannah was. I mean, that was so it's fast-paced.
In that 8-year period between the two of them, in Hannah's childhood, devices were not as prevalent.
No,
and content was not as accessible. And now, 8 years later, I can understand parents feeling overwhelmed because you're outnumbered.
Yes.
There are so many voices and so many platforms and so many things pulling and trying to get your child's attention. Some of them positive and some of them very, very negative. But I think it's certainly the responsibility of every parent to be aware of what your child is consuming and how you can protect them from things that really have no place in their life.
Yes. And when it comes to that, as a mom, I know I've had to kind of get more research on what I need to do to keep up with my 12-year-old versus Hannah, now 20, is some of the things that you can do on your phones is make sure you eliminate those social distractions with the cell phones. Make time to put them up. We have a basket in our kitchen where before dinner we make every kid go turn that in. And I have to tell you, as a parent, it makes you check in your phone too.
Well, none of our children have phones. We have given them.
That's good.
We have given them communication devices that we own.
He's real big on that.
Yeah,
you don't pay for that thing.
You don't pay for it. It's
it.
not yours. It's mine.
That's right.
And so there is no privacy
Yeah.
for them in that space. I
still
can
have
pick
our-
up their phone at any moment. I can look at everything that's
right.
on that phone. And if they don't think that I won't spot check
We
their
have all their
Foot Locker,
passcodes saved.
if they have a passcode that I don't know about it, they lose their phone.
That's true.
So
You
if
have
they
it.
want to go back to the Stone Age of smoke signals, just try me, bro.
We have some apps too that shuts down their phone at night. I
well,
think that's super important not
and
to have your phone at your bedside.
Back to this idea of relativism and truth and all these the conversation we're having here. Some parents hear that and they're like, well, I don't want to intrude. Your job is to intrude.
That's right.
You are the protector. You are the guide. You are the leader in this relationship. And you have a responsibility to watch over that child, not give them to the influences of the world. Now, I've had this conversation, especially with my older two kids. And it's important that they understand, I'm not trying to keep you from anything. I will protect you from certain things.
That's good. Yeah.
I don't want to keep you from enjoying life. I don't want to keep you from experiencing wonderful opportunities. But if I look at something that I recognize to be harmful, I will protect you from that so that you have the opportunity to enjoy the best of things in life. Conversations can be had around that approach. Some people say, well, you have to let them fail. Trust me, they're going to fail
No matter what.
if you're protecting them as much as you want to protect them, and they'll learn from failure.
That's good.
But you do not intentionally allow them to harm themselves just because you don't want to intrude on their privacy.
That's good.
And some of the stuff that kids look at, whether or not they recognize it, it creates harm. A lot of the things that I believe are driving the amount of depression and mental illness and things that they talk about affecting young people today, I believe it is significantly driven by the images that they're intaking on a consistent basis, because they'll sit there and scroll their life away.
Yes.
And most of the time what they're scrolling is somebody else's paradise that they're not a part of, which plants the seed in their mind that everybody else has it better than they do. And it's just a very important place for parents to pay attention.
That's right.
And be intentional. Take it away from them. Don't let them have it. Whatever it is that you need to do as far as the boundaries and the borders of that dynamic, your child needs to recognize that's a privilege, it's not a right.
That's good. Yeah, I 100% agree. And we have boundaries at our house, and our kids, I do the RPAC, which is an app that you can literally control and turn off certain apps. And we do Life 360, where we track our 20-year-old at college and know where she's at.
She has allowed us to do that.
And she's okay with it because she's like, hey, she doesn't.
We told her when she left, we said, look, you can turn it off. And she said, no, I want you to know where I am.
I want you to know where I'm at.
So, I don't know that her brothers will give mom the same privilege.
I don't think I'm going to give them a choice.
But I have told Kendal that, when they say I do, we're shutting it all off.
Yeah,
There's somebody else's to keep up with.
So, man, it's been a great conversation.
It goes by quick. We just covered one topic and didn't really get all the way to the bottom of it. But if there's more content like this that you want to hear, if there's conversations that need to be had and you're hoping that somebody would speak to the issues and the answers that you need in life, give us a chance. Matt and Kendal are here to bring you faith-filled, biblical-based answers to life's questions. God bless. We'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us today. If you were encouraged by this content, we want you to share it with people you know that need to receive this kind of information. Also, click the link in the bio to find out how you can submit your questions or be a part of an upcoming program.